Should the government be able to deny individuals on a no-fly list the ability to buy a gun? In the wake of the Orlando shooting, this has been the top question in the country, and also the most important one. But for reasons that you might not have heard. At first, we should be clear about what this no-fly list is. It's a list kept by the government, specifically the executive branch, that contains the names of people whom the government suspects of terrorism. And thus, they want to keep close tabs on them. It's so close, in fact, that if any of these people try to board a commercial plane, they'll be denied the ability to fly. And now the argument is that these people should also be prevented from obtaining access to firearms. But this is where the problems start to pile up. The list is often wildly inaccurate. Case in point, an 8-year-old Cub Scout ended up on the list because he shared the same name as someone else whom the government was following. And that was 6 years ago. And he's still on the list. And the maintenance of this list is so casual that clerical errors often put other innocent individuals on the list. According to leaked government information, nearly 40% of those on the list have no known associations to terrorist organizations. And so the list itself is problematic, but so is the process to get on the list. The criteria are vague and overly broad. In Maryland in 2008, 53 peaceful protesters were put on the no-fly list at the behest of the Maryland Police Department for this reason. They opposed the Iraq War and the death penalty. In their case, simply exercising their First Amendment rights resulted in them being branded by the government as suspected terrorists. But enough with the swindlers list. Back to the original question. Should the government be able to deny guns to people on the no-fly list simply because they're on the list? That is, deprive them without due process. A due process is a legal term that means that the government cannot deprive anyone of his or her rights without fair treatment through the judicial system. All actions taken by the state against an individual must be the same for everybody to avoid prejudice and discrimination, and the evidence must be enough to convince a judge that the concerns of the state trump the rights of the individual. And, of course, the standard is innocent until proven guilty. This due process is nothing new. It's older than America itself and is enshrined in the 5th and 14th Amendments. But to deny an individual his rights simply because he's placed on the no-fly list, there's not even a semblance of due process. The executive branch will not alert him to his inclusion on the list, will not disclose to him the reasons he's on the list, and they maintain sole discretion as to whether or not he remains on the list. All the while, his ability to travel by plane is cut off. He may be detained and interrogated at random points throughout the U.S., and he may be subject to invasive surveillance and FBI investigation. And to deny that being branded as a terrorist by the government will affect other rights is to forget the innocent individuals over the past 13 years who were wrongfully ensnared in the war on terror. As you can see, the consequences of being placed on the no-fly list are real and deal intimately with individual rights, particularly your right to privacy. But nowhere is the government forced to defend its infringement of individual rights in front of an impartial arbiter. They short-circuit the system and skip due process completely, shooting down the system of checks and balances that this country was founded on. Political commentator Mark Joseph Stern made this point quite clearly. If the government can revoke your right to access firearms simply because it decided to place you on a secret and notoriously inaccurate list, then it could presumably infringe your other rights in the same way. You could be forbidden from advocating for causes you believe in or in associating with like-minded activists. Your right against intrusive, unreasonable searches could be suspended. And you would have no recourse. The government could simply declare that, as a name on a list, you are owed no due process at all. But back to guns. It's important to remember, whether you agree with it or not, that the Supreme Court ruled in D.C. versus Heller that owning a gun is a constitutionally protected right, which means that the government can't deprive you of that right except by due process. So to block this right simply because your name is on a list is nothing near due process. You're not even charged or convicted of a crime. But shouldn't the government block terrorists from getting guns? Absolutely, yes. In fact, I would go even further than that and say that if there's enough evidence to convict individuals of terrorism, then the government shouldn't be stopping at guns. And they should be tried, convicted, and incarcerated. But as it stands, this is not the case with the no-fly list. The government should keep guns out of the hands of terrorists. But using a secret and notoriously inaccurate list is not the way to do it. And much less using that list to deny rights to innocent Americans. For the government to abuse its power in this way would simply recreate the entire situation that prompted the founders to believe we needed a Second Amendment and due process rights to begin with. So let me rephrase the original question. Should the government be able to deny rights to individuals not convicted of a crime simply because they're placed on a secret, spotty, and inscrutable list without giving those individuals a chance to contest their inclusion in that list? The answer should be an emphatic no.